Whew. The Sony A6000 is half as much as the Canon M50, and it's almost 4 years old. Is it still worth getting in 2018? Let's find out. What's up everyone, I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. Cameras are a hot topic, and picking the right one is a highly personal and sometimes very expensive proposition. Enter the A6000. This camera was released in April of 2014, so more than 4 years ago, and honestly still kinda holds up quite well for making home videos or online content. I purchased this used off Amazon for about 400 bucks, so like I said, this is almost half as much as my current favorite travel camera, the Canon M50. Since I bought it used, we can't really do an unboxing, but let's see what came in the box. Before we really start digging in, let's talk about the basic specs of the A6000. When it comes to making videos, I don't really take photos. Sorry. The Sony A6000 has a 24.3 megapixel APS-C size sensor, very similar to what's found on the 63 and 6500. It uses the Sony E-mount system, so any current Sony lenses will still fit on this tiny guy. One of the biggest spec wins inside of the A6000 is the fast hybrid autofocus. It's a combination of phase detection and contrast detection autofocus. This spec immediately puts it in the top rung on the Canon ladder in my opinion, because if you don't have the correct focus, picture quality really doesn't matter. One of the negative specs about this camera is it does use the tiny little Sony NP-FW50 batteries that really never last as long as you'd like, and you never have enough of the batteries, long story short. It can record in 1080p 60 frames per second. This is not a 4K capable camera. If you do require 4K, you can check out its bigger brother, the A6300. And unfortunately, it has no slow motion capability besides the 60 frames per second. Physically, the camera is almost identical to the A6300. On the top, it has the shutter release and the customizable button. I almost always set this to the record button. We'll see why here in just a second. On the back, you'll see one of the biggest weaknesses of Sony's entire camera line, and it's this weak, kind of articulating screen. Just let us flip it around, Sony. You will get a full complement of other buttons, and for the price, you can have some very manual control over your picture, which is a huge benefit on this price of a camera. On the right, you'll see why I set the custom button to the recording, because this is the recording button, and it's in the most awkward position ever conceivable on a camera. We'll see if that peaked the audio. On the left side, we see the biggest overall weakness in the A6000 specifically, and seriously, this would be such an amazing budget camera option, except where we have micro USB and micro HDMI, you'll notice there's something missing. There is no audio in. Come on! It's so close! So close to being the perfect budget camera. On the bottom, you will see access to the SD card and battery compartment and the 1/4-inch tripod mount. Okay, we've talked enough about the physicality of the camera. Let's see how it looks in use. And this is an audio test of the Sony A6000, audio test 1, 2, 3, 4. So obviously I don't have a microphone or anything plugged in because this does not have an audio in jack. We're just using the two front microphones on the camera itself. This would be such a better camera if it had an audio jack in. Okay, back to the video. Like we mentioned, one of the major negatives in the Sony line is you don't get access to an articulating screen, so if you do want to see yourself, you've got to get yourself one of these fancy monitors. Even my nice camera that I'm filming on right now, the Sony A7 III, has the same weakness, and I've got a monitor that I'm looking at. Sony, it's just a negative about the Sony's whole line. But the monitor's something you can work around. Something else you're gonna have to work around, like we mentioned, is the audio. There's no audio in, so like right now I'm recording audio on the camera itself. However, here you'll have to record it off camera. So again, the audio is not terrible, but it's not great. If this had an audio jack, I would be recommending this like crazy. Now you can get a Sony branded microphone that plugs into the hot shoe mount, so it's not impossible to get good audio. You just have to buy a proprietary option or record the audio separately. And honestly, that's not even that big of a deal. You can easily sync audio in post. A physical negative about the camera is it feels cheap. It's fully made of plastic, and the biggest shock I had when taking it out of the box was how cheap it feels. The A6300 and A6500 feel really good in the hand, and it kind of just turns me off to the camera a little bit and how budgety, like how cheap it feels. So after using this for a week, what do I think about the A6000? Image quality wise, I think it looks perfectly fine, and for $400, it's a pretty darn good bargain. Normally, I have a problem recommending the lower price cameras to people, as cell phones are almost as good these days as a traditional budget point and shoot. But this one looks darn good for the price. Again, I paid $400 for it. It's pretty darn good. The biggest selling point of the A6000 is by far the autofocus. The autofocus, especially when compared with other cameras like the Lumix G7, is it's so good on the Sony cameras, even on a budget one like the A6000. Now, like I mentioned, the APS-C size sensor combined with that killer autofocus makes it really easy to get a nice shallow depth of field, but also keep your focus in that. And there is not another camera at this price tag that really comes close. The closest is the Canon SL2, which is a DSLR. It's a little bit bigger than this. But the biggest negative, and the one that makes me slightly hesitant to recommend the A6000, we mentioned earlier, is the lack of an audio jack. It's not a deal breaker for me personally, as I spent a year recording my audio separately from my camera, and honestly, if you're doing studio work, it's not even an issue, as you can just automatically like click to auto sync audio straight from a camera to a recording system. It's really not a big deal. However, if you do plan to take this camera outside or do any vlogging with it, you're gonna be sorely lacking in the audio department unless you purchase that proprietary Sony microphone. And that would be a deal breaker for me. If I was still gonna be vlogging, I would want everything to be as easy as possible because you're grinding that content out on a constant basis. And having to fiddle with audio in post is not something I would want to deal with. So what, right? So should you get an A6000 in 2018? If you are looking to start making content on YouTube and you want to spend the least amount of possible and get a good quality camera with great autofocus, then I would absolutely recommend the A6000. Honestly, I'm surprised with how well it worked for how much it costs. Again, you can find it for half as much as my Canon M50, and I thought that worked surprisingly well for how much it cost. Speaking of which, I bet the next video might be a fight to the death over which of these two 1080p cameras gets to live in my camera bag forever. Thanks for watching.